Welcome back, friends and scoundrels, to Weird Wolf Unchained for who knows how long. I'm Brand,
And I'm Ryan.
and today we're talking about Underwater. But let me address that comment real quick. I'll probably be changing the name here soon. Um, Probably actually be in place before this recording comes out, but whatever. And house cleaning stuff, man. Sound like we're just not into this tonight, don't we? House cleaning stuff. Like, comment, subscribe if you're on YouTube. Let us know what you're liking, what you're not liking. Maybe some things you'd like to hear us do more specifically, I guess. Should be starting to get a lot better flow of what we're intending to do with this as we continue forward from here. And same thing if you're on podcast, pretty much rate and review. Let us know what you like there, or go visit on YouTube, whatever you want to do. Yeah. So, Underwater. You want to do the synopsis, or
I can give a brief one if you want. Underwater takes place relatively close to in the future. The Marinara Trench, sorry,
Mariana?
yeah, Mariana. Thank you. Tongue just did not want to say that right. A drilling platform. They don't think they ever mention exactly what they're drilling for, but we end up with a unspecified disaster right off the bat. Damn near a cold open to the disaster. We literally meet one character before it hits, and it's kind of a combination sci-fi thriller horror and
Sure.
disaster
Let's
because
just
of it.
throw a bunch of noodles at the wall and see what sticks.
Kinda, yeah. That's well, without reading it verbatim from a site or anything. That's the basic plot. Our survivors try to escape the crumbling wreckage as they go.
So I just want to touch on a couple things there real quick, just for a little bit of clarification. End credits, we get a time period about 2050.
Oh, it is okay. Yeah.
So about 30 years from now, and you might get it in the opening credits to it and pay as much attention to dates there. But like, it's got newspaper clippings and stuff, so you can pick up the date there. And
I actually jumped the opening credits, and which I knew was a mistake because this isn't the first time I've watched it. But I jumped the opening credits for this rewatch, and I just stopped at the end of the movie. So yeah, I missed that point, unfortunately. But
and then the opening credits, they're drilling for crude oil.
Okay, just more oil,
which
okay.
I find honestly a little bit disappointing.
Yeah, whole lot more to get that far down than just oil. But I mean, whatever's going to make you money, I suppose.
Yeah. So before we get into this movie, I want to jump back a couple movies and talk about A Quiet Place. I had a fun idea.
Okay.
But one thing on first watch, this movie did kind of remind me a little bit of how I felt about Quiet Place.
Mm.
But I don't think it's as bad as it was for A Quiet Place. But I just had a really cool idea watching those opening credits and it flashing through stuff that would have actually been a decent way to start Quiet Place.
Would have definitely given us a lot more information.
Yeah, and even if you're just
yeah,
scanning through his room just a little bit slower, a few less newspaper articles, stop and highlight the things that are important for us to know.
Yeah.
And then you get to a window and you follow the window out to Lee on top of the silo. And as you're going out there, the sun's setting. It gets dark by the time you get there. You see him lighting the fire.
Did I say that that a montage at the beginning of A Quiet Place may have been a good way to go? Because it's essentially the same idea. It's just clip art montage.
I think we touched on that in a couple of different ways. I think we each had our own idea of how to do that.
Yeah.
but then like essentially the story's just about the same. But
Mm.
instead of having that kind of cold open, you do the that actual opening is flashbacks as we kind of introduced to the characters, except for Lee the very first time,
Mhm.
to kind of set up what's going on. Because like I'd still have him have the pictures of his son, but I don't know if I'd want him burning them,
Okay.
just because I think it would set it up a lot better for down the road when you get to his flashback of him failing to get to his son and him dying. What's his name? Bo, I think.
Uh,
And
yeah.
you have that flashback just before we see him working on the cochlear devices to kind of establish why he's so determined to do that a little bit. But then that could also be almost your final one to be like, all right, this child, this is how the child died. And
Yeah.
this is why everybody feels this way. And just a little bit of editing difference makes a hell of a difference.
Oh yeah. Uh, editing room decisions can make or break a movie. Absolutely.
And that's one of my things with this movie too.
There are definitely moments of style over substance with the editing here. I'll give that. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I noticed is that we don't really get into the characters too much
Yeah.
until the end of the movie.
Yeah.
Like then we're given all this information about the characters and how they actually relate to each other and everything.
Yeah.
Like you're
And
supposed to do that at the beginning.
yeah, and that's the flaw. One of my big flaws to this movie, because I actually, like so many of the movies that we've talked about, I saw this in the theater at the beginning of the year before everything got
Yeah.
screwy. And I was basically alone.
Nice.
But I enjoyed this immensely. And unlike A Quiet Place, afterwards, I didn't have many complaints. I didn't have a meltdown thinking about it. There's a couple of minor things that I dislike about this, but not many. And
Yeah.
that touches on one of them is that get introduced to Nora for like 2 minutes, maybe 4 tops.
Yeah.
And
And that shit
and
hit the fan.
yeah, and then crap, yeah, and it's like, okay, yeah, I get the feeling that someone, either the writer or the director, wanted to break some of the rules with this because they straight up break one of the rules about narration. Cold open starts with her hearing her thoughts, and the movie ends with it too. And
Yeah.
in this instance, I don't mind it because there's no good way to convey that without making it look like she's talking to herself in either
Yeah.
instance. And so narration, in this case, it works for me. But yeah, not meeting any of these people. So we have no idea. I mean, if this movie had 20 more minutes on the beginning, 15 to 20 minutes, where we get to meet the people and before they're in a crisis scenario, I think this wouldn't have bombed nearly as bad as it did.
A few things with it. Because like this Shat, sorry, not Shat. It sat on the shelf at
Yeah.
Fox for 3 years.
It started production early 2017, ended production end of 2017, and it just sat there until the beginning of until February 2020.
Yeah, and looking through IMDb stuff because I was really struggling to kind of understand some of the things that the movie was wanting to do,
Mhm.
let alone what it was actually trying to do. And so I was digging through that, trying to see, 'cause, sometimes you can get some interesting snippets from it.
Yeah.
And I watched interviews and all kinds of other stuff. And one of them was people questioning if there was some studio interference in it, which could be a thing.
Mm.
But have you watched The Signal?
I have heard of it, and it is one of those movies that I think I would like, but I haven't watched.
I would
And
like
I
it.
Yeah.
Because I didn't dislike it, but it has a lot of this similar stylistic element to it that this
Yeah.
does. We just get dumped into a situation with the characters, and just kind of go on this ride with them.
Yeah.
And it's definitely a slow burn, pretty predictable, but it gives you everything about the characters at the end of the movie instead of even in the middle would have been a little bit better. But
Yeah.
yeah, and like thinking about this with these characters, I don't depending on how you want to do things. Like I said, I struggled a little bit trying to understand maybe what they're trying to say through themes or what their actual intent to go with was. Um, it
And that's actually
definitely
something I
feels
wanted to touch on too, because there's a couple of instances through to the middle of the movie where it the it seems to try to be saying that one of my big pet peeves about science fiction movies is uh, a science fiction movie should not hate itself. And some movies wear the guise of science fiction will be actually being anti-science, is what I mean.
uh,
And
Jurassic Park's a pretty good example of that, but
Jurassic Park's a pretty good example of that. And
Michael Crichton actually pulled that off pretty well, I think.
yeah, that's actually a very good example of an anti-science science fiction movie. It is both effectively. This our research assistant, what's her name, Emily.
Yeah.
She even goes to the extent of straight up saying that we dug too deep, that we shouldn't even be here, and that was a cringy moment for me. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, even in the theater, I hear that and I'm like, are you trying to make me hate this movie?
Yeah. Well, my biggest problem with that because I don't mind the cautionary side of things because it is valuable to have that aspect of science to not do things for the sake of doing things.
Well,
Um,
uh, now, in the instance of doing not doing things just because you can, that's one thing. But that is almost literally the modus operandi of science.
to a degree.
Yeah, to to find out what they can just because they can. And I'm going to save part of this rant for later because it's not that anyone's not going to know the spoiler of the end if they're actually listening to this, but
Yeah. 'Cause if you've been listening to this any little bit, we spoil the hell out of this stuff
oh
in
yeah,
a
yeah,
very random, haphazard way.
yeah, and again, there's the, the the ending of my anti-science rant is best done towards the end of our conversation when we're talking more about the end of the movie, because it sort of ties together. But
Yeah.
um, yeah,
But no, like they make that comment, but then they don't give any actual foundation to
yeah,
that potential theme or that potential metaphor, if you will,
yeah,
of because like they don't determine if it was an earthquake necessarily. They don't determine if first spoiler, I suppose, the creatures did it.
yeah,
If if it was a product of drilling, if it just happened, like and for the sake of the movie, just trying to keep that vaguity, it works. But at the same time, like they are trying to say certain things.
yeah,
Like you brought up the narration. One of the things that I struggle with that is I can't tell if it's a bookended narration, like if it's here's the first part and then here's the end part,
yeah,
or if it's two separate things. Because sometimes when you have that kind of narration where the main character starts off, they usually start one way, and then their end narration puts a cap on it by demonstrating their character development.
yeah.
And that's not there either, because back to the opening credits, that's some of my clunky notes, maybe. They bring up the topic of isolation and being
Mhm.
underwater for that long, so it's like it's trying to set up this as it's going to have a psychological element to it
Yeah,
because in her narration, when you're underwater for this long, days and nights blend together and there's waking and dreaming and it's hard to tell the difference between the two,
yeah,
but then it doesn't do anything with it.
yeah.
and even visually it starts it off with it because there's a spider 7 feet below the surface of the water,
Well, so
or not
6 foot,
7 feet, 7 miles.
yeah, 6.5 ish miles, yeah.
Which,
Yeah,
like,
that's
you wouldn't have a spider down there. So is that something that could be a projection of her imagination? Like, what's going on here? But nope,
yeah.
it's a real spider just because he thought it would be cool. And I'll give this guy that. He does rule of cool pretty well.
Yes, yes,
Like that's what makes a lot of this movie forgiving.
yeah,
Um,
I would totally agree with that. That the cool on display is absolute. I mean, every some of the transitions are way style over substance, and uh, there's a couple of things that uh, what is it? Two or three of the one, two, yeah, two instances. Or no, it is three. It's where we kind of cut. Not so much the way a movie typically does, because this movie doesn't really. There's some time lapse in a couple of spots where you know that they were like waiting around for a little longer than it seemed, but um, this movie likes to transition between chapters with explosions.
eh,
and
given
and
given what you're doing, that could be an effective way to do
yeah, and
it.
and in this, normally I would actually complain about that, because it's like, come on, how Michael Bay can we get? But it's really actually very effective here.
Yeah. It's an element of the story, and it can lead to some time lapses and changing of scenery to.
Yeah, good. And like
There-
like you mentioned, that it hints on the theme of kind of altered senses and isolation and stuff like that. And then every time we transition, and honestly, the more I think about it, it every major transition in this movie is done with an explosion. There's more than three of them. I think there's five,
yeah,
because
nothing really stands out to me. I really should have.
there's the explosion that occurs just after they lock down the central hub at the beginning. There's the guy's suit that explodes.
Yeah,
There's the reactor exploding. There's the captain's suit exploding, and then there's the hand of God, for lack of a better term, slapping down and causing a cavitation wave, which is effectively an explosion. Um, the movie transitions with explosions.
that's fun. uh, yeah. So I want to harken back a little bit just to keep things interesting.
Mhm.
So, first time watching this movie, I was like, all right, there's definitely some alien vibes here.
Yeah,
There's a little bit of Pitch Black,
a little
a
bit.
little bit of Armageddon. Which, like, I definitely buy the Pitch Black because there's in the opening credits you have a moment where it just says Pitch Black
Yeah,
in a newspaper in highlights, and I'm like, okay, but it's like a real quick flash. So
yeah,
like, yeah, I can definitely see that now. Yeah, and the first time I watched it, I did have some struggles with it because I was like, God, I could just be watching Alien right now.
yeah. It wears its influences on its sleeve, and it's not always a good thing, because
Yeah,
the more you compare it, the more I compare it in my mind to Alien, it it is drastically inferior, because it never it never stops to take a breath.
let's see here.
And that's one of the things that Alien did really well, is tension, 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 let it sink in.
Yeah,
And at the beginning, I mean, if you'd never seen uh the trailers for Alien, you could have been going into just about any space movie for the first 45 minutes. But yeah, and so yeah, that is one instance where it's not 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 bad, it's just inferior, and it's sort of obvious. But
well, then it did I say here? Um, if I did, I'm going to repeat myself.
Please do.
Um, Trying to figure out, I did watch some interviews and Q&As and behind the scenes stuff.
Hmm.
And the one Q&A I only took from the first couple minutes when he's talking to William, begins with an E, the director.
Okay, yeah. Oh crap. I should remember this. It's a street here, Eubank.
Yeah. Um, Apparently he referenced a lot of other movies a lot on set,
Hmm.
and I could totally see that. 'Cause apparently, so did pulled a little bit of a uh Kubrick, and just
Okay.
had to take like 20, 30 shots from different angles and doing all kinds of different stuff. And I could almost see him on set being like, "Oh, it was really cool. This thing in this movie. Let's do that."
Yeah.
Which there's nothing wrong with that
No,
necessarily,
no.
but like when you do that while you're in the process of making a movie, it can be very easy to lose what you're doing and take away from it. And I could very much see that kind of being what happened, maybe a little bit.
Could be, could be. Honestly, not having known any of that, it makes perfect sense to me because some of the way things are shot here just aren't the standard way that those scenes would normally be shot, and it's one of the things I find very interesting about this movie.
Yeah,
Um, there's a couple of instances where my first thought is that the movie is the movie's suffering from the male gaze sort of thing on a couple of occasions, but it does
movie.
the uh, then it does the exact same thing to one of the male characters,
Kinda, yeah.
and it's like, oh, okay, well, you're kind of screwing with us.
Well, it does, but it does it in a more comedic way.
Yeah,
So it almost changes the reasoning for it.
but
Um,
which is true, but the whole the uh, if it had done the traditional male gaze on the male character without having done that to the female characters, it wouldn't be a punchline, and there's no joke there without this normal and then the unconventional. So
suppose.
yeah.
Yeah, and honestly, like normally probably wouldn't say this, but the male gaze thing is something that kind of bothered me in this. It took me out of the movie quite a bit. It was like, all right, you're just doing this for the sake of doing it, and there's better things you could be doing.
Mm, I get
With the suits and stuff, it just there's a lot of things that didn't make sense with me that pulled me out of the movie too, like the way suits like that in real life generally work. You're wearing some kind of like a skin tight undersuit with
mm.
it, and that would
I can't disagree with
change
that, but
things.
because yeah, there is what we have now. Maybe there's and because they don't go into any of the technology that we don't have, like the air filters on these suits become an issue multiple times for characters throughout the movie, and they never give us any explanation for how they work. So it's like, okay, we just have to take that this is a thing, and it's like, okay,
And some of that I'm okay with. Is just like I said, generally with suits like that in real life
okay,
because of like chafing and stuff.
yeah.
It just all right. You just wanted her running around in underwear. Okay. And again, like normally I wouldn't have a problem with it. It just for some reason I don't know. Maybe I'm changing a little bit.
And see, the only reason I even bring it up is because of the juxtaposition, and the 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 funny thing is later in the movie it doesn't actually focus on them in the same way. Yes, that there's two uh women running around in their underwear, but it doesn't actually. Once it's made its joke, it doesn't
Just
go
linger on
back.
it too much.
Yeah, it doesn't linger on it the way the male gaze
Uh,
thing typically does. So
yeah, because there is a couple moments where you're almost that Texas Chainsaw Massacre angle following Kristen Stewart, but it's actually focused on somebody else. So her derriere is a little bit more blurry.
yeah, And if we were truly dealing with the male gaze, that would be the focal point. But yeah,
I did notice a couple points like that.
yeah, exactly. Like I said, it does do it on purpose several times, but I truly think it was to set up the joke, to set up the juxtaposition that we're breaking one of the rules and doing this. But I mean, honestly, you've got more behind the scenes on this than I do
Oh,
because
you know
I
what?
haven't.
That might be why they made that editing choice. Because in that scene that you're talking about, the female gaze is bad, real bad editing.
Yeah,
Because Nora makes a comment to Emily to take her pants off because it won't fit in the suit, and then we cut to everybody having their clothes off. Cut back to everybody starting to take their pants off, and that's when we get T.J. Miller's rump right in the middle of the screen.
Yeah.
These are porn too.
yeah, and all. I mean, I know that he is a problem. Honestly, I don't know what the thing was about him, but this is probably even more than the Deadpool movies, because he's obviously there to banter in the Deadpool movies. Here, I can't think of an actor that could have been this character exactly other
That's
than
part of my
him.
problem with T.J. Miller. So this is coming a little bit from our pre-show banter. I'm not a big fan of T.J. Miller for the most part. I like Jack Black slightly more than T.J. Miller.
Yeah, and again, I don't know what the not a fan or not fan of his. I mean, I think he's distracting in Deadpool and 1 and 2 more than he's helpful, because he's. I mean,
he's just there to riff with Ryan Reynolds.
Exactly.
And like he does in this, just make random comments that are supposed to be funny. But it's just so out of place sometimes that it makes
I don't actually think he's supposed to be funny here.
T.J. Miller.
Well, no. Again, yes, he's T.J. Miller, but and I did say I don't think anyone else could have quite done this character the way he did, and that might be why he is the actor for this character. But he is the guy who deals with stress by just talking.
And at that to a degree, it just, I don't know. It might just be the T.J. Miller thing for me.
And it might be. I mean, I know very little about the guy other than him being in Deadpool. That's it. Him in this Deadpool 1 and 2, and I know that there was some sort of scandal involving him. That's it. That's all I know about the guy.
God, I can't even think of what other movies I've seen him in. Because I've seen him in quite a bit, and like How to Train Your Dragon, he plays Rough Nut, and like that's a perfect character for him. Just saying dumb stuff at times.
I didn't even know that.
But and there's like other movies that he's done with, like maybe with Seth Rogen or something. I don't remember. Okay. But it's just him just riffing out random lines, and that can be funny. But like, there's got to be more. And like Deadpool with him playing Weasel, I just can't imagine T.J. Miller actually being a smart person.
Yeah.
Somebody who's capable of doing stuff, because as Weasel, he doesn't do any Weasel stuff. Just riffs with Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah.
And in this, like, we don't actually know what his purpose is. Like, if he's just the driller, that's one thing. But if he's, I almost get the impression that maybe he's supposed to be a geologist. Maybe
he is one of three people that has their own diving suit, because his name is on his suit. Smith's is on his, and so is the captain's. The other suits were just sort of cobbled together from what I got out of that, and so I think he's some sort of diver / mechanic. It'd be my guess, but
if he's supposed to be a geologist, that doesn't mesh for me. He's supposed to be a drill worker or outside welder or something, which I don't know if you'd really be able to pull it off at that depth. But
you can. It's just a matter of the right tools. But
yeah, and like that's irrelevant to anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, TJ's one of the things that pulls me out of this movie, and it might just be because I.
Yeah, and I can understand that that might be one of the reasons a lot of people had issues with this, because he's a big chunk of the first half of the movie.
Yeah, and I mean
Uh,
he's got some moments that could be decent, and meaningful. Like he
yeah,
keeps making quotes to Alice in Wonderland, which is one of those things that I think they were trying to do thematically with it. But like, if you're doing Alice in Wonderland, this is just her falling down the rabbit hole. That's it.
yeah, yeah. And there's a little bit of camaraderie between him and Smith and him and Nora, but yeah,
And that's
that's
like the other thing. Like at points, you're supposed to be under the impression that none of these people really know each other, but then they all seem to, except for Ronaldo.
uh yeah,
Which,
Ronaldo.
well, I'm gonna backtrack that a little bit.
Rodrigo.
Paul, yeah,
Rodrigo.
Rodrigo.
Yeah.
Paul knows him. T.J. Miller's character knows him
Yeah.
because after he dies, Paul's sitting there and kind of thinking to himself about his friend, and these
Yeah.
jokes he used to tell, and that got to me a little bit personally because I kind of have one of those things.
Yeah.
But and then his thing with the rabbit, but I don't know. Like, are we supposed to understand that these characters are supposed to know each other?
And the quote from Rodrigo early, that he knows of Nora, but she just barely knows his name.
Well, and like
He,
he usually
he
works
mentioned
shift and she works nights, I think.
exactly, and he mentions that he changed shifts and blah blah, and it's like all we needed was 10-ish minutes, maybe a little bit more, with these people, and that would be solved. I mean, it's the getting to the action, getting to the meat of this movie is fine, but you've got to have the softer bits too,
Yeah.
and the tension and and I'm gonna sound like a broken record, because I said the same freaking thing essentially for A Quiet Place. They cared about this movie. That they put a lot of effort into making it look good. They put a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
all of the
The
actors are on their game. They give a shit, but that's not enough. And we this movie falters because we don't have a connection to these people before the action starts.
Well, and even then, so I suppose we can start getting into the themes a little bit because that's why I have danced around the characters thing a little bit.
Before it.
Is so the other thing out of the opening narration is Nora talks about cynicism, the comfort of being a cynic.
Yeah.
And if that's something you want to go with for her character, fine. But that's all she does. That's all that we're given about it. And then she does nothing cynical for the whole rest of the movie.
Uh, there's a
Because
there's a couple of offhanded comments when the captain, this is just the one that comes to mind right off the top of my head, but when the captain is detailing their plan to try to survive, which involves actually going down to the ocean floor, another mile down, and then having to walk a mile across open water, which
yeah,
sounds nuts even before they have monsters on their ass. She's like, can you at least just admit that we could die doing this? That fits with that, but
a
that's,
little bit.
yeah, it
But
and there's a couple other little things here and there, but it's not, you're right, it's not highlighted in any way, shape, or form, really.
like a couple things, and this is where I struggle with like where do we actually get this character development? 'Cause you could have the collapse of their station start happening, just maybe give them a little bit more time than like what is it, 30, 40 minutes?
Yeah.
I think it's like 36 or 39 maybe. But like give them, like 70 minutes. That way we have some time for them to sit down and kind of rehash with each other how they know each other and develop a plan and figure out what each of them does. That way, how can we use each other,
Yeah.
and or how can we make best use of the things that we have to get through this?
Yeah. I mean,
Which would be a fun, interesting way to do it, or just that blanket traditional. Here's 10 minutes going through each character, and to play off the isolationism a little bit more
yeah.
instead of like Alien, where we see them as a group, show them working individually and have her with her partner, whatever they work on in mechanical engineering,
Yeah.
where she's working on one thing and that person's working on another, and she's being very cold and distant to them on purpose.
Yeah.
And then the other big moment for that would trigger this character transition to the end is, instead of her saying they have time or whatever, or giving the people time to get through the door, you have Rodrigo doing it, saying those things, and then she just looks at him dead in the eye and goes, "They don't have time," and hits the button and closes the door.
Yeah.
Because then that actually makes it a lot more powerful for the moment when he makes the decision to give her the good helmet. And
Yeah,
it
I
starts
agree
the
with that.
triggering effect of, oh, maybe people aren't as bad as I thought.
Yeah. That would definitely help her character development flow a little bit better. Yeah.
Like, even as she's making the comment about the comfort of cynicism, she's saving a spider.
Mm.
And it's almost like it's a mask that she's trying to wear, that because she's sad and upset, but we don't know that yet because that's information that isn't given to us till the end.
Exactly.
And like playing it, being a smarter movie too with that information, is her work area is just a work area. It's just got her tools and whatever she's dealing with. And then we see Smith's, and it's got the picture of her with her boyfriend or fiance or whatever he was.
Yeah. Plus
And
trinkets.
show that
Yeah.
they were a group.
Yeah.
They're like, wait, what's going on there?
Yeah. You have to characterize these people for us to care, for us to understand their journey. And
Yeah.
I mean, okay, seeing someone die and knowing that that person made a choice to take the risk themselves versus you, just mentioning Rodrigo again, that is a powerful thing, but it would have been even better if we knew more about both of them. And
We knew a little bit more, and again, how that informs her changes.
exactly, because even though we have essentially two people that aren't Nora, that survived this, she is our final girl, for lack of a different term.
For all intents and purposes.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just one of those things that just kind of fell flat for me.
Yeah.
Because like, you want me to think this so hard, and the bubble collapses.
Yeah. I hadn't thought of the lockdown scene right at the beginning in that terms. That is a great way to cap off her coldness better than having her be more concerned and more caring.
Yeah.
And actually, I mean, obviously we don't have a way to show this, but I mean, it was basically Nora at the controls, two people running down this imploding corridor, and if she had hesitated even a few more seconds, we wouldn't have a movie.
Yeah, it's just some things there. What else did I have here? The isolation thing, because I didn't finish that quite. Because like, the isolation still plays a big part of it. It just becomes more of an element of the setting rather than an
Yeah.
actual theme of what's going on. Because it definitely does not take the psychological aspect. Because
No.
sitting down watching this, I was like, all right, is this going to be a little bit Alien Pandorum, just underwater, or what's going to go on here?
Not that Pandorum wasn't underwater either, but
Technically speaking, spoilers for that movie,
uh,
but that's another one that's actually supposed to take place in space. But
yeah,
we don't know all the details right away.
that one does the isolation thing a little bit better.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's an actual purpose of the story, and
Absolutely.
how being isolated from humanity, being in these essentially voids, or empty places, the toll that takes on you. That's why like people on submarines in the military only on there for a few months stints at a time,
Yeah.
is because it can be harrowing just in general. Like
Oh yeah.
you have, but communication's a little bit better now just because of the technology. But even so, like you could be cut off at any moment.
Yeah.
Like
And
like we talked about a little bit with Quiet Place, the sonar thing. If you're off just a hair, you could take an antenna away.
yeah. And the brain does weird things when you don't get to see the sun for long periods of time. And yeah, it's
It could have been an interesting thing. Like thinking about like what would I do with this story in that regard, and you'd have to definitely go a hard R. But like you
yeah.
have her go crazy, and she sees everybody as monsters
The
and starts killing them, and then like the end of the movie, you just see this room full of dead people that the whole movie we saw as monsters with her.
yeah. The there was a on my rewatch when the first explosion hits after she shuts the door, I did have a thought that sort of headcanon alternate continuity thing. What if this movie is just her fractured psyche going through the trauma of that explosion and she's dying through the
Ah,
process of
those
of
are
the
always
film?
fun too.
Yeah. And I mean,
Oh, that could fit.
it could fit. It would be a. I mean, the killer with those sorts of movies is how do you reveal that it's not happening? And
Well, this one, it very well could still work because getting right to the end of it for a second, she does die
well, yeah, she
in an
does die.
explosion.
Hmm.
And oh no, that does work better because that's kind of one of my little
Yeah,
little problems with it is that at the end she has water splashing on her
yeah.
rather than an explosion and being engulfed in those flames, which is probably what would actually happen.
Well, it is a.
So if
It,
she's in that moment of dying and you have water falling on her, that would explain the water instead of the explosion.
uh, going back to the rule of cool, I think that shot is just more just for that specific visual, but the nuclear explosion like that probably would have flattened the place before fire would have been involved. But
For that, there wouldn't be water splashing on her.
well, no, exactly. But I'm not saying that there would be water splashing, but I'm saying the rule of cool in that scene is what's happening.
That's probably what was actually going through his mind, yes.
Yeah,
But to make this movie a bit deeper than it probably is,
yeah.
if you have her dying with water splashing on her, or the room filling up with water,
Oh yeah.
that your brain would do that.
Uh, to be clear, all of our speculation on this about themes and depth and
Sorry.
stuff, I actually think is just us. The fact that it's disjointed and that some of the stuff doesn't match up, like her opening narration doesn't entirely fit with her character at the beginning of the movie and all the other stuff. It all just comes down to I think this is just a dumb action movie. It's not. I don't even think it's supposed to entirely be a horror.
Definitely has moments where it just shifts gears. Like
Yeah.
it starts off as a disaster movie, then and the survival that comes from that,
Hmm.
and then there's another aspect to it that I can't quite that I've forgotten, can't reclaim. But
Yeah.
then it like shifts into a creature feature.
Yeah. It shifts into that opening. I mean, up till we are introduced to the creature, it really does seem like it's going to be sort of a disaster thriller until we get the monster, and then we still have the shaking, which they keep thinking, well, what's going on there? Is that aftershocks or what's going on? But then we've got this monster to deal with, and all the themes and the instance of kind of lost in translation anti-science and some of the other stuff. Yeah, I really think we're just sort of projecting because the movie does so little of what it's trying to we think it's trying to say well that I don't think it's actually there.
Well, we're gonna get into a couple of the heavier things now because these are things that I think are actually. Well, we'll save the blowback for later because that ties into what you want to talk about here with the end.
Hmm.
No, so I forgot about that one. That Q&A, and then have you seen Filmento on YouTube? Have you watched any of his stuff?
Um, I want to say yes, but maybe not.
Like videos sometimes,
Uh,
like how to deceive the audience. I think
uh,
was the one,
uh,
or
um,
how to trick the audience.
you cut out on the first part of some of that. No, I don't think I've seen that.
But he does kind of critical breakdowns of movies and talks about why they may have been successful or why they may have flopped or whatever.
Hmm.
And he brought this point up with this movie and in the Q&A, which was done by one of Williams' cinematic friends, like his I don't remember if he's actually a director or what, but they like know each other.
Okay.
And they both brought up this hidden romance between Ronaldo and Nora. And I just want to say that's a terrible idea.
Yeah, that's a terrible idea.
It's not really a theme or anything that's there. It's one of those things that other people were trying to read into or saying should be there. Or saying like, no,
Really?
yeah, like this guy who was asking the questions, pushing the actor for Ronaldo into that so hard. He's like, was there romance there? Is it hidden romance? What's going on there? And I can see maybe a little bit on Ronaldo's side having some attraction, but it doesn't need to be an element of the story,
Yeah.
and it wouldn't have made his death any more impactful.
No. Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
wanted to touch on that because I made a note on it.
Yeah.
But there is just like with Alien, this element of how terrible the company is, and a read into capitalism with that,
Oh yeah.
and that is very much set up through the opening and ending credits with all the
Yeah. The additional
newspaper
information we get
clippings and
there.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because there are examples, like it talks about some mysterious things happening. I think it's supposed to be beforehand.
Yeah, I even remember, even though I skipped it on my rewatch, I remember that from the other times that I've watched the opening credits talks about some mysterious disappearances and some other stuff that's going on, and at the end, they basically
Trying to
Tien,
cover up what actually happened
yeah, they try to
with this
distance
event.
themselves from it entirely in every way, shape, and form, and definitely an error of the Wayland Yutani Corporation going on there. That they're just some element knows more than what they're saying, and that maybe, yeah, okay, they were drilling for oil, but maybe that's not all they were doing.
Yeah, because like your opening credits makes it a little bit more murky because it does make the comment that there some people aired some grievances of mysterious things happening, the company not buying into it, and then it also makes a comment about what are the effects of being down underwater this long and in the dark and
Mhm.
hallucinations and stuff.
Yeah.
And then the end plays a lot heavier on that because it does, companies trying to keep the survivors away from everybody. They're denying help from the government. They're
Mhm.
doing all this, seemingly shady stuff,
Yeah.
which is that's something I did interesting because a lot of times, a lot of these movies will have this anti-capitalist messaging or anti-consumerism is a little bit more apt. But a lot of times, the government and these other systems are just as interwoven in how that works. Like, They Live is a really good example of that. And
Mm,
this
yeah.
movie goes out of its way through that to distance itself from that. The Stuff is another one where the government and the companies are very interlaced and helping each other out, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to do that one.
Mhm.
And I do find that interesting too, because a lot of times in real life there is, the FDA helping some companies and denying other companies things.
Oh yeah,
System
that's
is a great example of that can harm ingenuity and give certain companies the upper hand over other companies.
Yeah.
and helps to drive up prices and a lot of the things that so many of us find wrong with what's going on in the world right now.
Oh yeah. Yeah, brain glitch. Copyright is another one which all YouTubers know fairly well. But the I have a feeling that the public domain laws are about to change here in the next 5, 6, tops 10 years because Disney, if they don't spend a crap ton of money on their government contacts and get some stuff changed, Mickey Mouse will go public domain very
Yep.
soon. And
And
last time, the
Warner
last
Brothers in DC helps out a lot with that too.
oh
Say,
yeah,
yeah,
I'm not
we want
saying
to
it's
keep a hold of
I'm not saying it's
Batman
just
and Superman.
yeah, I'm not saying
But
it's just Disney, but uh, Disney is definitely a spearhead on that, and everyone wants to have total control over their properties, but it does stifle creativity because
it's just
some great stories on some characters will never be told because specific people just don't get the chance to write for them because the people that control it. That's the whole thing about public domain. Stuff goes public domain is supposed to open it up and allow everyone the chance to utilize things that everyone knows. And but
yeah, and then you have companies like Disney that have certain levels of cooperation with the government
yeah,
to rewrite those laws because getting the laws in place can be really tough sometimes, especially if it requires any kind of amendments to the Constitution or whatever. But once that law is already in place, they can just kind of change it willy nilly,
mm,
which we see happen a lot of times. It's something that I thought was a little bit interesting because, again, a lot of these movies don't go out of their way to distance themselves from the government. Like, even Alien, it's never the government's never brought in at all as an aspect of it, and it's
um,
so far into the future that it's almost implied that Weyland Yutani is kind of like Big and Large in the Pixar universe, where it effectively becomes its own government.
that is sort of the case in the Alien universe. The Weyland Yutani has such a uh, stranglehold, effectively, over what is left of the government because there's a whole bunch of weird crap that happened in the Alien backstory universe that leads to where they are, and that that's why the in the second movie it's not a stretch for Weyland Yutani to send out the the United States Marines. So
Yeah, I forget. God, it's been a while since I watched that.
yeah,
Might just be something that gets overlooked.
but yeah, there's a lot of layered backstory to that first movie that doesn't get into the movie in any way, shape, or form. You actually have to look at
That
like,
first movie doesn't really need to
well, exactly,
because it just
and
works so well on its own without those additional elements. But when you start
yeah,
expanding the world, now
mhm,
you do kind of need to introduce those, and that's
yeah.
actually a very interesting way to segue into the other thing. Jessica, what's her name? Who played Emily?
Oh yeah,
She brought up one of the kind of elements which goes into Emily's comment about we've gone too far,
hmm
and it's this idea of repercussions of these things, and I'm putting it more into the specific category of blowback or unintended consequences.
yeah,
And it funny that we went into Aliens talking about how Weyland Yutani is able to effectively utilize this military force that should be or maybe is a government entity, right?
yeah,
Because when I think about blowback, I think more often about 9/11 and how that's a response to the United States decades of
oh, yeah,
interference in the Middle East and how that started. Well, there might have been some before, but I think the real kicker for it starting was 1953 in British Petroleum, asked the CIA to start a coup in Iran
Yeah.
because their leader at the time was going to nationalize the oil, which would have cut all of those profits and everything off from BP.
Yep.
And little tangent here on this. I think you might have shared this a couple of times. What got me started on that path, understanding that, is I kept seeing this picture of Afghanistan or Iran, an Iranian woman
hmm
wearing a bathing suit, very westernized picture,
Oh
her
yeah.
leaning up against a car in 1950, maybe a little bit earlier than that,
Yeah.
like maybe 1948. And I'm like, what happened that they went to this completely other fundamental area?
Yep.
And that was the turning point from that. And without getting too deep into the history, there's a successful overthrow of the current leader. A more fundamentalist leader took over, and that
hmm
we continued to do things like that in the region, even utilizing Osama bin Laden in the 80s and
Yep.
90s to fight against the Russians in the area.
hmm
And that was his direct response for that was 9/11, flying those planes into American properties, something that
Yep.
did hurt
We,
us, but should have hurt us more.
we look at that event as an unprovoked attack, and it's only an unprovoked attack if you are ignorant of 40 years of history. Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
mean, it continues to this day because there's a lot of the same stuff happening that happened during
Oh
they
yeah.
kicked off the civil war in Syria,
Oh yeah.
where our administration at the time was giving weapons to Al Qaeda, the people who flew the planes into the towers on 9/11, to start a civil war there
Oh yeah.
because oil and other resources. And to tie that back into the unintended consequences, the destruction that came from that from 9/11 initially, but also with Syria specifically, the immigrant crisis that came from that.
hmm
Or it was the refugee crisis, that's right. They weren't necessarily immigrating, not by choice. And, the destruction that happened in their homes and they had nowhere to go.
Yep. Little geopolitical history in your horror talk.
Elements that play into horror, though. I mean, that's
Oh
the
yeah.
whole reason why we're getting into
Tr-
talking about this.
True horror. Yeah.
Um, is those real life horrors, and
hmm
usually horror and comedy are the only ways to properly deal with those things.
Oh yeah. Because action movies just sort of
They
perpetuate
glamorize it, and
yeah, perpetuate and glamorize and make it seem like in a lot of ways action movies are the band-aid or the band-aid slash blindfold for the populace.
hey, you can even get into that a little bit with drama with
Oh yeah.
I forget the name of the movie, the one about Kyle, what's his face, that piece of crap.
I
Oh man, we're gonna
I
get
don't offhand know which one you're talking about. But
um the sniper that was on the gun range, and
oh, okay. I know which one you're talking about. I haven't seen it.
yeah, I watched the movie. I don't remember,
Yeah.
but that one's kind of, there are action elements up to it, but it's very much a drama.
Yeah.
And with those situations, there's a more clearly defined good guy and bad guy
Yeah.
in those regards, rather than, well, things are a bit more muddy than you think they are.
Yeah.
But the blowback in this movie is potentially, or theoretically, maybe is more correct for that. The drilling too deep, and did they accidentally get into this gas pocket that released these monsters? Did it cause an earthquake that released them?
Yeah.
That's what's kind of left unclear about it. And I think that, again, I think I said it at the beginning, doesn't provide the foundation for that theme to
Yeah.
settle and then be carried through the movie, because that very much could be if you introduce those creatures a little bit sooner, say in like the second act.
I think we've gotten to a good point where we can actually bring up the next part of what I was working towards.
That's why I put them in that order.
Yeah. So anyone who's already seen this knows that the big bad daddy of what's going on is Cthulhu.
Which I have a problem with them using that. That's just kind of like a hey, here's a thing.
And this is
Look at
actually
my
the
shiny
only
toy.
this is actually the only tidbit that I know from behind the scenes
Yeah,
is Cthulhu was not in the script until post-production.
interesting.
Yeah, that
That would
they
make sense why it doesn't fit thematically with anything else because
yeah,
Lovecraft's work very often also has that element of madness driving things, which is
oh yeah,
what put me into that phase of you could very easily do this weird slasher movie where she thinks she's fighting monsters, but it's really her coworkers and
yeah. Uh, but yeah, so yeah, Cthulhu. Uh, and this is actually the point where, so in what was it? The Mountains of Madness is the book of his that has Cthulhu in it. I think so.
uh,
Um,
there's that one. There's I think Call of Cthulhu. I
y-
tried listening
yes.
to In the
Um,
Mountain of Madness. I didn't get through it because my copy was weird and
the
kept getting out of order.
yeah the
Um, I think Ben
if I
Smith
remember
deals
right,
with it a little bit too.
yeah, if I remember correctly, in the Mountains of Madness is the one where we actually get to see Cthulhu,
Okay.
and they run this icebreaker ship into him, and the whole point, and this isn't me reading into anything. Lovecraft was basically quoted to an extent saying that them running the ship into Cthulhu was supposed to uh, uh, highlight how ineffective humanity would be against these uh, uh, dark outer
Monstrosities.
gods. And
Yeah.
I like, and that's one of the reasons I actually love the ending to this is, and also going back to the little bit that we have with the you've brought it up in terms of consequences, I've brought it up in terms of anti-science, and the reason I say that this is not anti-science is one of the greatest technological advancements we've ever made is basically used to blow Cthulhu to hell.
A nuclear reactor.
Exactly, and that is a total flip on the head of the uh the Lovecraft specific how ineffective we would be against them, and this is uh science being used not in the way it was intended, but
Science.
to have that effect against literal Cthulhu. And
Yeah.
I mean, we don't see him die, but it's
Well,
definitely implied
as
that
the
he got
explosion's happening, though, he is
exactly.
trying to
He's trying
scramble
to
away and
escape.
get caught
He's
in that
trying to get
bubble.
away. Yeah, he definitely gets caught in the shock wave getting pushed out. Uh, Whether or not it kills him, we don't know. It's not shown, but it definitely did not have an effect.
Yeah.
But um
At the very least, he looks like Darth Maul now.
yeah, right. um
I
and
mean, I could just imagine. We'll get into this tangent a little bit later, but the way explosions work underwater is fascinating.
oh, it really is. And uh that this is effectively the second nuclear reactor that goes off in this movie, and they're only, I mean, they're less than 2 miles away from where the first one went off,
Yeah.
and yeah, the first one didn't destroy them because that's how that would work underwater. The effect would have been so minimized
It depends on
compared.
how big that explosion radius would be. And I have some serious reservations about the two survivors actually surviving for a few reasons.
Okay.
And the first one that bothers me is the depressurization. Now, mind you, the science, they don't get into it. I
Yeah.
don't know exactly what they're doing, but as
Yeah. We.
quickly as they're running up that water column, you should there should be some impact from that.
Oh yeah, the depressurization's a bitch, and the bends is deadly under the best of circumstances, and that is true. They don't get into the science of 30 years in the future enough to know what's going on.
Yeah.
So
This bothered me a lot though with this
yeah.
explosion. Like, essentially, when you have that explosion underwater, you're vaporizing all that air around it, and obviously, water has to replace it. And coming back to my Navy knowledge a little bit, most of your torpedoes aren't designed to actually damage the ship itself. They're designed to explode underneath it, creating a cavity. So that way there's no support under that part of the ship and it'll cause it to break.
Yeah.
Essentially. For anybody who doesn't know how that works. Now, as you get deeper down in the water, those effects change drastically. But I did find this video from, I got to be like the 1950s or 40s or something. But it was showing like these explosions. They were doing it at different depths, and how most of the time the explosion would actually work its way down to the most rigid surface, or work its way towards the most rigid surface. And they had it by a wall. They also put it, close to the bottom of his tank or whatever they were working with, and put it between steel plates to see how it would do. Like at one point, when the plates were close enough, the bubble actually split. But also, you have the effect of the explosion, and I forget, like these are pretty small caps, and I forget how much they said it was, but the one ended up like it essentially looked like a firecracker, but based on the material, it could have exploded. The explosion could have been more powerful.
Yeah.
And it had like a 11-inch sphere. So it was a pretty big explosion. So, depending on how big that explosion actually is, would have an impact on that. And
true. But
was that first one a smaller nuclear reactor? Or was it about the same size? Do we even know?
We do not know. But you do have to remember one thing: these are reactors and not actual bombs. Yeah. So the fact that these things go up in the manner that they do is actually less likely than issues with the explosion, because the first one happens actually above them by at least half a mile, if not more. And as you were saying, the bubble would go up effectively.
No, it would actually go down. So it would go to the closest, most rigid surface. And at that point, that would be the ground. Like, even watching some videos of gunshots underwater, because there's an explosion there too, you can see as that initial explosion happens and comes out of the front of the barrel, the bubble starts working its way down to the bottom of the pool. And that's 3 or 4 feet away from it. So, like, some elements of the explosion go up, but the air bubble would continue as it's pulsating to go down to the ground. It's just, it seems odd that that's how that would work. And I can't explain the physics behind it or anything, why that happens that way, because it wasn't explained in any of the videos.
Well, see,
but it is what happens.
Well, and that's the thing is the scientific, because I am working on a physics and engineering degree.
Yeah.
So the pressure versus the force of the explosion, and if we have any listeners at this point, I hope we're not losing them. So the force of a nuclear explosion would radiate outward to a certain degree and then lose to the pressure, because we are talking 6+ miles under the water, and that is ridiculous amounts of pressure. So that is what is definitely making these less destructive than they would be. I can say that for certain. Now, the dynamics...
The dynamics are a lot different too than they are on the
that's
surface.
what I'm saying. The dynamics of the perpetuation of the shockwave and blast radius, I cannot speak to specifically. I have no specific knowledge in that area.
Specific information
But
on that too, and we just don't know.
yeah, with the exception that um, even and this is brought up in the movie that before the uh, the monster starts causing problems and starts breaking stuff, that the water at that depth went up in a area effect by 10 degrees. Now they don't say if it's Celsius or Fahrenheit, doesn't really matter. 10 degrees change at that volume
Significant
of
change.
water is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Both of those nuclear explosions wouldn't have changed the surrounding water by 10 degrees. It would have flash boiled off a bunch of it,
Yeah.
and then it would have dissipated and cooled. In fact, hot water cools faster than water at a equilibrium state because it is energized. So weird tangent. I take partial responsibility for that one.
It's a fun one though.
It is fun. I like it. I think you liked it. I hope anyone listening at this point liked it too.
Watched this movie again last night, and I got down this rabbit hole on YouTube of
Mhm.
trying to more specifically or more to better understand how explosions underwater work.
Mhm.
Because the way our brains, the layman's brain, would conceive of an explosion underwater is that you have this outburst of air that has
Yeah.
to come back, and a lot of times you get a bubble, and that rushes to the top.
Mhm. Yeah, might even
And
some people might
that's
even think of those old videos from the nuclear tests where they detonated them a few just below water to some degree or another,
and I
and you get
watched some of those,
yeah, and
and
you get to watch something happen. 6 miles up, there isn't going to be any sign of these nuclear explosions.
and and that was one of the things that I was trying to understand. 'Cause
Mhm.
I mean, 500 feet down, that was pretty good
Yeah.
effect. Like it created a tsunami,
Oh yeah.
and again, like, but I couldn't find anything that explained that a lot better.
Yeah.
But the way the actual explosion works underwater, how it's just, there is a pulsating bubble, like it collapses in on itself, and then
Mhm.
the shock waves happen, and
Yeah.
it will continue until the energy is dispersed, either from connecting with the surface or until it just runs out of energy.
Yeah. And
Um,
the depth because of the pressure has something to say about that. And yeah, at 6 miles, not
because
100% certain of the math, but I'm pretty sure a non-military grade nuclear weapon loses almost entirely.
it's so hard to say because we've never done that. So
Oh no, we've never done it, but
not that
we
far
learned
down, anyways.
we learned uh I've actually watched. Oh wow, we are weird on this one. But I've actually watched some videos of a guy that a physicist that reconstructed uh, some of the old nuclear footage, and he used them the tests from the nuclear footage and uh, some fairly advanced math and physics to basically get the most accurate read on the actual devastation, the actual power of those bombs. And just from old video footage, literal film footage that he had to fix in some cases, and examining the pulse waves on a frame by frame basis and doing the math.
Yeah,
Really interesting
and
stuff.
I am a little
I
bit
hope
out of my
someone
here.
sorry?
I will admit to him, I am a little bit out of my element for not, you know,
Yeah.
having a better understanding of physics itself because I've never studied it. But
It's one of those things that honestly, if we taught math right in this country, what we consider advanced physics would probably be a course most seniors would take the basics of
Yeah.
if we taught math right, because we teach math completely wrong.
A lot of things completely wrong in this
Well,
country.
that's true too.
Anyways, you got anything else?
If you've gotten through this conversation and haven't seen this movie, go give it a watch. Even though we've spoiled the hell out of it, I think it's fun.
Yeah. Hey, each time I've watched this, I've actually enjoyed it a little bit more. So there is something enjoyable.
Yeah.
I said this director definitely has this rule of cool aspect to his storytelling. I wouldn't be surprised if he plays Dungeons and Dragons, but he's
Right.
somebody I would definitely enjoy playing Dungeons and Dragons.
I would agree with that.
And check out his other big movie, or not big movie. He had a small budget for it. He did it. But check out his other movie, The Signal. It's fun, interesting story, and you can tell that he definitely already kind of has his style of what he wants to do with his stories, and does it. Because the whole reason why I watched The Signal was to see if it was the director or if maybe there was some studio interference.
Yeah.
And I think it was just that's just the way this guy works.
Yeah, I haven't seen any of his other work, but I would agree with that. It definitely has kind of earmarks of a what I guess I would coin as an auteur perspective, and that
Weird, because this movie had a big budget.
comparatively, yeah,
60 million.
Yeah, this
And
for a movie that flew almost entirely under the radar, yeah, this had a decent budget. Yeah, 50 to 80 according to Wikipedia.
Yeah. So too bad that it just didn't hit. I don't know. I feel like almost, if you want to say there's studio interference, it was in the marketing, and this was the last movie with the Fox 20th Century logo.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because this movie was released after Disney had acquired Fox. Yeah. Speaking of more Disney influence in the world.
Right.
It was probably just, all right, we're just going to put this out there just to get everything, just to clear the table and move forward. And there's almost no marketing for it. It was released in February or January.
Yeah.
And that was...
yeah.
And that was even in the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, COVID-19. And while it hadn't quite hit the United States yet, I think that probably had an impact on things too. And probably definitely had an impact worldwide because, China was already suffering from that and was already locked down.
Yeah.
And actually, I think they're bigger than we are now, aren't they?
Yeah, they are a bigger market at this point than we are.
I think we'll put a button in this, and then you and I can continue on tangents afterwards.
Probably
listening, especially if you made it through this. I found it fascinating, but whatever.
I enjoyed it.
It's nice to have a platform to get certain information out there that, unless you're a political nerd, sometimes it's hard to get. And that's another reason why I wanted to do this, was to be able to in a more informative, more entertaining way. Doing just a straight political podcast, you just kind of get lost in that sea.
Yeah.
All right. Again, thanks everybody for listening. Got some other stuff in the works. As far as you and I are concerned, I picked Jennifer's Body to do next.
Yes.
Which is an interesting one, I think.
I agree.
For a lot of reasons. But we'll get into that next time.
Yep.
All right. Well, toodles, people.
Bye-bye.